So as you guys can see, I am back in my car, which also means that I am back in the United States of America, and more specifically, Los Angeles, California. And I've been here for a little over 48 hours, but I've lived in the United States for the entirety of my life. And growing up in the US, you're taught to believe that the US is unequivocally the best country in the world. This is just a fact of life. When you're raised in the US, you believe that it's the best. I mean, when you spend every single year of your childhood, starting from age 5, pledging allegiance to a flag that you don't even understand at that point, of course you're going to believe that the US is the best country, because your reference point, aside from that conditioning, is either people who moved here from other places, which in that case, it probably is a better country than wherever they came from, or conversely, it's people who were born and raised into the same conditioning that you received, right? So the US is kind of a cesspool of conditioning. And I'm not saying this to bash America. I'm not anti-America. At the end of the day, this is where I was born and raised, and this will always be my home. But at the same time, having traveled to Europe and having seen how other countries and other societies operate, I now understand, I now have the perspective to truly grasp that America is not unequivocally the best place to live, probably for the vast majority of the people living on this planet. And by the vast majority, I'm speaking to the 99% out there. If you are not a part of the 1%, or let's even expand that to the top 10% of people, economically speaking, you would probably be better off in Europe than you would be in America. This is a genuine belief that I have. The quality of life for the average citizen seems to be a lot better than it is here in America. And I'm going to go much deeper into this probably in my next video. But in this video, I want to explain some of the reverse culture shocks that I experienced after coming back from Europe. More specifically, Valencia, Spain, and Zurich, Switzerland. Now, the first thing that I noticed upon arriving back in the US was the level of patriotism. You see American flags everywhere, and this goes right back to what I was saying about the conditioning. You receive a level of conditioning that I don't believe any European country, at least, receives. Maybe some of the Asian countries receive this level of conditioning. I don't know, because I've never been there. But as far as Europe goes, I believe that, not just from my experience, but from my research on other people's experiences, that our level of nationalism and patriotism is an anomaly in this world. And it's especially an anomaly in Western society. Now, this was brought to my attention even before I got back to the US and saw how many American flags we have just out and about, when my girlfriend noted how my passport was so Americanized. If you're an American with a passport, open it and look at all of the American, dare I say, propaganda that you'll see in your passport. Everything from the bald eagles to the flags and all of these things that are supposed to represent America. My girlfriend is born and raised in the Netherlands, and she showed me her Netherlands passport, and there was nothing that could indicate that she is from the Netherlands other than the passport itself saying Netherlands. It's a completely different mentality, which I'd imagine is rooted in the European experience with World War II and Nazi Germany and all of that. A lot of that goes without saying. However, I do believe that this level of nationalism is oftentimes more destructive than it is productive. I believe that conditioning people to believe that where they are born and raised is the best place to live on earth can be very, very detrimental to the overall perspective and the overall intelligence of your society. Whereas in a place like Europe, where you're encouraged to travel to all of these different countries and take in all of these different cultures, it's just a completely different mentality. And I'm not saying one is better or worse, but I don't think that the effects of this level of nationalism, especially over an extended period of time, can be undermined or understated. Now, the next thing that I noticed, ironically, amongst leaving the airport and getting back to the US officially, was the level of economic inequality. Now, obviously, I live in California at the moment, which is a prime example of economic inequality. As a matter of fact, I'd go as far as to say that the Los Angeles metro area is kind of an exacerbated caricature of the majority of America. And what I mean by that is American society runs on economic inequality. Being on the flyaway bus going back to where my car was located, which, just a little side note, if you live in the LA area and you've never used the flyaway, use the flyaway. You will save hundreds of dollars on whatever trip you take, but I digress. Being on the flyaway bus and seeing all of the homeless encampments on the side of the road, which I had come to see as normal having been here for a few months, and even in certain parts of Texas, for example, Austin, parts of downtown Dallas, just seeing communities of homeless people and coming to believe that that was just normal. That was a normal part of any developed society. That blew my mind. Because in Zurich, for example, I didn't see any homeless people. Not a single person on the street with the cup asking for spare change. Not a single one. And then, on top of that, in Valencia, I maybe saw 5 homeless people. It was the same 5 homeless people, and they all seemed like they were still in their right state of mind. They seemed like with enough assistance, they could be pulled out of that situation. Whereas a lot of the people out here, a lot of the homeless people here, they're too far gone. There's nothing that can be done to save them. No level of assistance, no level of housing, nothing could really take them out of that situation. For some people, absolutely. But for the vast majority of them, no. They're too far gone. And if I'm being honest, a lot of those people would probably be better served living in mental health facilities. But that's a different discussion for a different day. Being in Europe, I saw less homeless people my whole entire trip, 2 weeks, in 2 different cities at that. I saw less homeless people than I would see if I simply drove down this street in LA right now. And the thing is, you could talk about how those cities are maybe wealthier, but LA is a very wealthy city as well. LA County is a very wealthy county. Okay, as a matter of fact, I believe that if LA County became its own state, it would be one of the most populated states in the whole entire country, right? And it's also an economic superpower. California could be one of the world's largest economies if it became its own country, and yet it has one of the highest rates of homelessness. This is not a problem in European countries, or at least the ones that I visited. And like I said, I've been to a lot of different places in the US where this is still a prevalent issue. Maybe not to the same scale, but adjusted for population, there is still a high rate of homelessness in most major metropolitan areas, weather permitting. So why is this a United States specific problem? I believe it's the mindset. It's the mentality of every man for himself and only the strong survive, and the general sense of individualism, which is at the foundation of our society. I believe, at least from my experience and from my observations, that in Europe, people are led to believe that the society is more important than the individual. Whereas in America, this is simply not the case. It doesn't really matter where you go in America. The individual is always more important than the society, which leads to high levels of corruption at the local, state, and federal levels. And the economic inequality is simply a byproduct of this. Nevertheless, seeing all of those homeless encampments on the side of the road blew my mind coming back here, because I had learned to pretty much ignore them. Okay, being out here in LA, or really in any major metropolitan area, you know that when homeless people approach you and try to harass you, you just ignore them for the most part. If you're feeling generous that day, you might give them something, but you never really know where that money's going to go. Whereas in Europe, like I said, you could tell that a lot of these people are still coherent, and that if you provide them with assistance, they will actually use that assistance in the way that it's supposed to be used, i.e. to better their situation. Now, another reason why I believe that the economic inequality is so prevalent in America specifically is because of the level of consumerism that Americans are subject to and encouraged to participate in. I heard Timothy Ward say something a while back that really blew my mind. He posed a question that I had never thought to ask myself, which is, why is it that the American dream always involves you spending money? And to follow up with that, who do you think truly benefits from the American dream? And I had to sit there and think about it for a little bit, because my entire belief system was founded on the notion that consumerism was good, that I needed to acquire new things in order to elevate my self-worth and thus the way that other people perceive me. But when I went to Europe, I noticed that everybody seemed to be on an equal playing field as far as consumerism goes. Some people maybe had slightly nicer cars than others, but generally speaking, the level of economic variance, which was displayed through the level of consumerism, was nowhere near as great as it is in America, especially in a place like LA, where on the same street, you might see a 1992 Toyota Corolla riding on hubcaps with mismatching body panels, and also a Rolls-Royce Cullinan 2023. You see high levels of economic disparity in the levels of consumerism. That's how we measure, more often than not, our economic status in America. What have you consumed? What brand of clothes are you wearing? What brand of car are you driving? These are the things that we use to measure success, and I believe that this is a very convoluted way of measuring one's success, because it's relative. It's completely relative. This notion of keeping up with the Joneses does not seem to be a thing in the parts of Europe that I visited, as well as the parts of Europe that my girlfriend has lived in and visited. As a matter of fact, when I told her about the concept of keeping up with the Joneses, it blew her mind. It completely blew her mind that somebody would go out and get a new car just to one up their neighbors, or just to keep up with what their neighbors are doing. It didn't make any sense to her because they live in a more society-based culture, whereas we have a more individualistic culture, which ironically is often relative to other people's sense of individualism. Now, as far as consumerism goes, one thing that I noticed upon arriving in America was how much more advertisement we are subjected to than our European peers. Now, that's not to say that Europeans are completely 100% sheltered from advertisement, but seeing these big billboards on the side of the highway and just seeing advertisement literally everywhere you go seems to be more of an American thing. Maybe Asian as well. Like I said, I don't know because I haven't been there. But in Europe, that didn't seem to be much of a thing because consumerism is not nearly emphasized as much as it is here in America. Seeing that level of advertisement, it's no wonder why the mental state of so many Americans is declining so rapidly, because we're constantly reminded of what we think we should need to achieve in order to keep up with everyone else. When in reality, if we simply focused on living better lives and building a better society for everyone with better social services, everybody would be happier and have a higher quality of life like the European countries tend to. They have a higher quality of life. This is something that I've noticed. In America, we work twice as hard. We're willing to sacrifice some of the labor protections for the sake of a higher quality of life that people in Europe already have. We are working twice as hard to achieve the same result for no reason whatsoever. Different discussion for a different day. The next thing that blew my mind upon returning to America was the level of car dependence. Now, you could argue that this is an LA specific issue, particularly with how big LA County is, but I'm from Dallas, Texas, and prior to that, I lived in Louisiana. And everywhere that I've lived, in most places that I've visited, you can't just get around purely on bicycle because the infrastructure does not exist. Now, this right here is a much more nuanced discussion that goes into zoning laws and corruption. The reason why American cities tend to be more car dependent is because that's what the zoning laws allow. The zoning laws not only allow, but encourage car dependency, and this is largely because of lobbying from the automotive companies, maybe even the oil companies, putting money in the politicians' pockets to pass these policies to keep people dependent on automotive transportation. If you notice, most American cities do not have extensive public transit options, and they also lack biking infrastructure. They lack adequate biking infrastructure because the way that the cities are designed, they're designed for cars, not for people. They're not designed at the human scale. They're not walkable, they're not bikeable, you can't rely on public transportation, or if you can rely on these things, you're living in one of the 5 to 10 most expensive metropolitan areas. Whereas in Europe, you can be in a more mid-sized city and still have access to these alternative transit options, which could save you a lot of money at the end of the day. So even though you may pay more in taxes, you're getting it back not only in terms of the freedom to not need a car, but also in having a higher quality of life because you don't need a car, because the cities are designed at a human scale. This is a much more nuanced discussion that I'll probably make videos on in the future, especially once I go back to Europe and book that one-way ticket instead of that round-trip ticket. But that's a different discussion for a different day. The next thing that I noticed amongst returning to America was the level of obesity, right? And this goes right along with something else that I noticed, which was the price of food. Okay, if you guys were following my Europe vlogs, you heard me talk about the price of food every single video because it was mind-boggling. When I got back to America, one of the first things that I did was go to Target because I needed groceries. I went to Target and I spent $60 on 2 bags of groceries. Now, I wasn't out here getting all organic stuff. No, I was getting Good and Gather, which is the Target store brand, black beans and corn. I got bread, peanut butter, I got granola bars. I got very, very basic items, which should not cost a lot. You guys saw how much I was spending in Europe. I was getting all types of fresh fruit, salads, all types of healthy shit, and spending 30 euros to feed both me and my girlfriend. Here, I'm spending 60 for myself to get lower quality food. I was heated, and as you guys can probably tell, I still am. I am heated because not only does the food cost more, but you have to drive to go and get it. You have to spend the gas money to go and get the food, which is overpriced as well. We're getting scammed, we're getting robbed, we are being hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok, and flat out deceived by the United States of America. But I digress. Having car dependence and also having high food prices, especially for healthier foods, making less healthy food more accessible to more people, creates obesity. Shocker. Okay, when people walk and bike less and they can't afford to get expensive food because they have to spend gas to get to the grocery store, they end up being overweight. It's simple science, it's simple math, it's simple logic and common sense. Okay, if people are not moving and they are consuming unhealthy foods on a regular basis because that's what they have access to, they are going to be unhealthy. They're going to be unhealthy. And like I said, a lot of these things could be solved by having better zoning practices, but the better zoning practices can't be implemented without changing the general mindset of society to being more of a society-based culture as opposed to an individualist-based culture. But me personally, it's not my place to change American society. It's my place to go to the place that I feel I fit in best.